Alright, good afternoon, you guys. I really apologize. I'm not in school again today. As you can tell, my voice is still really rough. Like, this is me talking loud. Hopefully you guys can hear it okay. And I am feeling kind of miserable, so I decided to actually take care of myself, and I'm staying home today. So, yeah, but it works out. Today's lesson's not that hard. And then I'll be able to answer any questions that you guys have on Monday as well if you need them, okay? So yesterday with the sub, you guys worked at solving absolute value equations, and hopefully you remember that there are two solutions, because again, we don't know inside the absolute value. It's like a present. We don't know, is it a really, really good thing, or is there a really kind of like sucky thing, like a pair of underwear or something? Like, no one wants a pair of underwear. So we always have to play both situations out and come up with those two answers. What we're going to focus on today is we're going to focus on writing the absolute value equations. You don't need to solve any of these. All you're going to be asked to do is to write the equations for them. So here are steps that we use for writing the absolute value equations. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find the middle number, which is also called the midpoint. So you see the word mid, which would be middle, and then point because it's going to be on a number line. I'm going to show you a way on how we did it similar to last year, finding the median. If you remember last year, median is the middle number in a list. So that's basically what we're going to be doing to find that midpoint. When you write your equation, the midpoint that you find is going to go in the middle of the absolute value bars. So every single equation, as soon as you know you have to write an equation with absolute value, it's going to be in this form. You're for sure going to have absolute value x. Always, always, always a minus sign there. And then your midpoint, or your middle number, is going to go right here. So it's going to go inside the absolute value bars. And the equation is going to be equal to the difference of the midpoint and the numbers. That's how it's defined. I'm going to tell you, you count how many numbers you crossed off. So this last step, it's actually a lot easier than what it sounds once you see an example. Okay? So let's take a look at some examples. So our first thing, the directions say write an equation involving absolute value for the graph. Awesome. As soon as you see that, you know your equation's going to be this to start with. Absolute value with x minus on the inside of it and an equals. Done deal, you already know for sure that's what's going to be in there. Next thing that we need to find is our midpoint, or our middle number. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at our 2 points that are on the number line, and we are going to cross off one number on each side until we find the middle. Now, if you remember from last year, sometimes we had two numbers that were in the middle. That's not going to happen this year. I'm not going to give you any of those situations. So we find with this one, as we cross off one number on each side, the number 1 ends up being in the middle there. I'm just going to make that look nicer. So 1 is in the middle. So that means 1 is our midpoint, our middle number. That's going to go inside the absolute value. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, but Mrs. Haugen, it's 1. Inside here, it looks like -1 or -1. Yep, it's just how the equation's set up. This minus is always, always, always there. So always write it, and whatever you fill in for your midpoint goes right here. If it's a positive or it's negative, just write it in there. Then we're going to count how many numbers we crossed off on one side. So I'm going to start here. I crossed off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers. And again, we only concern ourselves with one side. It's going to actually be the same on both sides. So we crossed off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers. So this one, the equation equals 5. There's our answer. You're not asked to solve, because if you were to solve, you'd actually get the 2 dots that were on the number line. All you're asked to do is to write the equation. So that's it. All right, let's look at another one. So now we have dots at -2 and at 4. Directions are the same. It's not written on this slide, but the directions are still the same. Writing an absolute value equation. So it's for sure absolute value, x minus absolute value equals, for sure, always a given. As soon as it says absolute value equation, that's what you're going to write. Now, let's find that middle number. I'm going to cross one number off on each side until I find that middle number. Now, it just so happens this one here is also 1, just because of how I ended up picking the examples from the book. I didn't realize it till after the fact. But this one also has a middle number of 1. So that goes inside the absolute value bars because it's in the middle. And then we count how many numbers we crossed off on one side of our middle number. So we crossed off 1, 2, 3 numbers. So that means this equation is equal to 3. And again, this number is always going to be positive. Because again, absolute value is always, always positive. If you guys have questions, help each other out. See if you guys can answer your questions to help answer this, write this equation, I should say. All right, let's look at another one. This one definitely will not be a 1 in the middle, so that's a good thing. Same thing. We're writing an absolute value equation. So we know we're going to have absolute value x minus other end of the absolute value equals. Again, that's always, always there. Let's find our middle number to know what goes inside the absolute value. Crossing off one number on each side. Until we find that middle number. And this time, our middle number is 22, so that goes inside our absolute value. Again, whatever number is in the middle of the two dots goes in the middle of the absolute value. Notice middle, middle. So they pair up really nice. Then we're going to count how many numbers did we cross off. Again, only on one side of the equal sign, or on one side of the midpoint. So we crossed off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers. So that means this equation is equal to 5. All right, let's take a look at this one. Again, directions are the same. Write an absolute value equation. On your homework, that's what every single one is about. So on every single question on your homework, you know you're going to start with x, absolute value x minus absolute value equals a number. That's going to be on every single answer on your homework assignment. Now, on this next one, we're going to find our midpoint, cross one off on each side, and we end up with -4. So this is the first time we've seen one where it's a negative number. But like I said, whatever the middle number is, that goes inside the absolute value. So you're going to write the negative and the 4 inside that absolute value. And again, it might look silly because we have a minus and a negative, but that's okay. There is another way to write this answer, but you are totally okay to leave it as minus a negative. Perfectly fine. Now, to find out how many numbers we crossed off, we do have to be careful on this one. Because, I don't know if you've noticed, but every other graph we've had, we've been counting by ones. This graph, we're not counting by ones. We're counting by 2s. So because we're counting by 2s, I didn't just cross off one number here. I actually crossed off 2 numbers. So I counted 4 numbers that I crossed off. So this one is going to be equal to 4. So just be careful with that. I know there's a 1, if not 2 on the homework assignment that are like that. So just be very careful to watch whether your graph is counting by 1s or by 2s. Most of them they're counting by 1s. But just watch out just to make sure on how your graph is counting. Now, how does this all play into the real world? I know you guys always ask that, like, when would we ever use this? What's the point of it? Absolute value is actually used quite often in the real world. I know in my job that I worked at Dairy Queen, we didn't specifically use absolute value, but we applied its principle for part of my job there. And we'll actually see an example like that here shortly. So for this example, it says the average January temperature in a northern Canadian city is 1 degree Fahrenheit. The actual January temperature for that city may be about 5 degrees warmer or cooler, because we all know it's not going to be 1 degree every single day. Like, it's going to vary. So the directions ask us to write and solve an equation to find the maximum and minimum temperatures. So only on the real world ones are you going to actually be asked to solve them. If you're just given a graph, you just write the equation. And the directions in the homework will walk you through that. So the first thing the directions ask us to do is we're going to write an absolute value equation. So because we're doing that, it's for sure x minus and then equals a number. So now here comes kind of the tricky part. Now we have to think about, well, what's our middle number? When we think about the middle number, like middle is our goal, is our average, what our ideal situation would be. So in this problem, is the 1 or the 5 referring to the average or the goal temperature at all? And hopefully if you're reading, it says the average January temperature is 1 degree Fahrenheit. So average refers to the 1 degree. So because that is our average, our goal temperature, that's our midpoint. That's what our target is. Hopefully we're at 1 degree, but it's not going to be exact. The other word, or the other number, is always going to tell you it could go up or down. That other number is going to have some flexibility. And so because it says it may be about 5 degrees warmer or cooler, you're going to put equals 5. Now, in terms of solving this, I totally know some of you guys could probably get this answer in your head. And that's fine. If you can come up with the answers solving it, that's perfectly fine. But I do still need to see this. This is going to be one question of your homework. Then there's a part B where you solve it. Same thing when you take your test sometime after Thanksgiving break. You will have to write the equation and be able to solve it and come up with those temperatures then. So this is the first part. We wrote the equation. Now we're going to solve it like you guys did yesterday. Yesterday, to solve them, we break them apart because remember, absolute value always has 2 answers. So you have x minus 1 equals a positive 5. So that's assuming we have a really good thing inside the absolute value. Or maybe it's a really bad thing. So we have to set it equal to a negative 5. And we solve both of them. I'm going to do keep, change, minus a negative 1. So x equals 6 on this one. Technically, we should label it, so it would really be 6 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you don't label on your homework, I'm not going to mark it wrong. Keep, change on your other one, minus a negative 1. And always, again, be careful with your math. But x equals negative 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So what these two numbers mean is that on average, the temperature in this Canadian city is going to be somewhere between negative 4 and 6 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything warmer than that is kind of abnormal. Anything colder than negative 4 degrees is kind of abnormal as well. This is where we would expect the temperatures to fall between. And that's what absolute value is used for in the real world. All right, our next one. It says a temperature for an enclosure for a pet snake should be about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take 5 degrees. We're going to find the maximum and minimum temperature. And again, I should have been more specific. I should have put in here that also write the equation for it. So we're going to write the equation as well. So first thing for writing our equation, x minus absolute value of x minus, I should say, equals, remember the number that goes in the middle is going to be our midpoint, going to be our target temperature, our goal temperature, what it should be, ideal situation. So we're trying to decide, is the 80 the ideal temperature for this snake, or is it 5 degrees? Hopefully as you're reading your text, you saw that it should be about 80 degrees. So in a perfect world, that enclosure would be 80 degrees. But we also know that we can give or take 5 degrees. So that give or take indicates that this is where it could change. It could be 3 degrees warmer, 2 degrees colder, still okay. So that means that 5 goes on the outside. Here's our equation. To find that maximum and minimum temperature, basically what that means is solve the equation. So maximum and minimum means to solve. So we'll split it apart, pretending what's inside is a good thing, so it's a positive 5. Then, assuming it's a bad thing, and setting it equal to a negative 5. And again, some of you guys might be able to come up with this answer without showing the actual solving step, and that's fine with me. Keep change, change. Minus a negative 80. So x equals 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So one temperature is going to be 85 degrees. With the other one, keep change, change. Minus a negative 80. Cross those out. Doing the subtraction there, x equals 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So for this snake, as long as the temperature is somewhere between 75 degrees and 85 degrees, the pet is going to be fine. Anything warmer than that, it's getting a little toasty in that enclosure for that snake. Anything colder than 75 degrees, it's a little chilly for that snake. So it has to be somewhere between these two. All right, our last example is something that I had to take care of when I was manager at Dairy Queen when I was in college, about the temperature that we stored our ice cream at for the best maximum flavor, basically. But according to this word problem that I took from the book, it says that ice cream should be stored at 8 degrees Fahrenheit with an allowance of 5 degrees. Write and solve an equation to find the maximum and minimum temperatures at which the ice cream should be stored. So it says write an equation. So this one here is, for sure, absolute value x minus, and the absolute value equals. So then from here, we have to figure out what number goes in the middle here. So we want to determine, is 8 degrees or 5 degrees our goal temperature? In a perfect situation, what temperature should the ice cream be stored at? Hopefully you see the phrase here, should be, with 8 degrees in that same, immediately following it. So that means 8 goes inside the absolute value bars. And this word allowance means something different than the allowance you receive from your parents or guardians. Allowance means that it could go up to 5 degrees warmer or 5 degrees colder, as long as it stays within a 5-degree range of ideal situation, means it's fine. It's kind of like, usually when you're driving, you usually get a 5 miles per hour allowance. You can go 5 miles over, and usually you're okay. Not always. I've gotten pulled over for going 5. Didn't get a ticket, but almost. But allowance means that it could go up 5 degrees warmer, or it could go 5 degrees colder. So this allowance is where it allows us to vary, and so that's going to go into our equal sign. Here's our equation. And then to find the maximum min, that means that we solve. So x minus 8 equals a positive 5, and x minus 8 equals a negative 5. Keep change, minus a negative 8. So x equals 13 degrees Fahrenheit. And then keep change here, minus a negative 8. So x equals 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So what this problem is saying is as long as the temperature is between 3 degrees and 13 degrees, the ice cream is going to be at ideal temperature. And that's what I had to monitor. One of my jobs as a manager at Dairy Queen is to make sure our coolers and where we stored the stuff that turns into the soft serve ice cream at Dairy Queen, it had to stay between 2 temperatures. Anything warmer than that, the ice cream might not taste as good. Anything colder than that, again, same thing, the ice cream wouldn't taste as good. So this is something that companies who have to store things at a specific temperature pay attention to. It's all about an absolute value equation that they use. So here's what you guys have the rest of the time to work on. You have the rest of the time to work on the writing absolute value equations worksheets. Also on Monday, we'll start the hour with a weekly review quiz on your warm-ups that you've had from this week. So that'll be the first thing that we do on Monday. Also, just so you know, Tuesday, remember if any of you are planning to retake the Unit 3 test, those need to be done by Tuesday. So if you still need to make test corrections or you have to do the retake practice, that stuff's got to be done on Monday before you leave. Otherwise, you will not be able to retake on Tuesday. If you guys have any questions, send me Schoology messages over the weekend. I'll probably be checking those throughout the weekend, and I can respond if you guys have any questions at all. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day.